going down the rabbit hole. First and foremost, the impact of technology and work in our working world. And at this time in 2016, just a couple of years earlier, there had been this big study that came out of Oxford. This is sort of like busting open onto the future of work scene, if you will. 47% of jobs in the United States are going to be computerized or taken over by robots in the upcoming years. A couple of economists out of Oxford sit down, they map every single job in our Bureau of Labor Statistics database and give us more or less this 47% number. Now, this is huge. And since then, McKinsey, Accenture, all of the consulting firms have come out with similar sort of data. And it's not all doom and gloom because there will be 2.6 jobs created for every job lost. However, the difference in abilities required for one or the other can be significantly different or can be significantly great. Right. And though, as I continued my research, it wasn't just the 47%, but rather one of the co-authors, and this book came out in 2019. One of the most fascinating things about this is when you look at the data overall, in general, humanity has tended to move toward abundance. However, as we move through these industrial revolutions, it can take up to 3 generations of time for people and families to recuperate what they had in this moment of disruption, right? So my interest in the topic became even greater. Impact of technology in work and our working world, right? 4 billion people, it was estimated just a couple of years ago that 4 billion people will be coming online for the first time. This is half of the planet that all of a sudden is going to have access to the educational and entrepreneurial opportunities that the internet provides. And just recently, Ericsson came out with some global data that projects that by 2027, there will be 7.7 billion smartphone subscriptions. And so half of the world coming online, what is this going to do for opportunities? What is the distinction and difference that this means for developed and developing worlds? There's a lot of interesting questions here. So the first piece was this impact of technology and work in our working world and what this could mean for all of us. The second big dynamic that I started to look at was a massive shift in global workforce population. And the first piece of this was looking at the increase in gig and contract work. Since 2010, more than half of the new jobs that have been created in Europe are contract or gig work of some kind. And so this means not solely Uber and things like that, not solely administrative work, but senior executives, medical doctors. So what happens in a world where jobs no longer necessarily means job? Right now at the end of 2021 up in Canada, it's 10 or 11% of the workforce is working entirely in the gig space. So what does this mean for society as a whole? And what opportunities lie there? And what is the disruption itself? What's the impact of that going to be? The second big shift in workforce population, and this here is Canadian data, for the first time, the number of folks who are getting ready to leave the workforce is significantly greater than the number of folks who are entering the workforce. Right now, 21.8% of the Canadian population is just bumping up against that age of 65, ready to retire. And then this dynamic shifts even further when we start to think about this notion of Peter Diamandis himself. He's written a lot on this topic. If we as human beings can manage to survive for the next 10 or 15 years, then our healthy life expectancy will extend another 10 or 15, even 20 years. And so what happens in a world where our population in general is getting much older and this thing that we call retirement isn't necessarily serving the purpose that it served prior, right? Lots of disruption in the space. And then the third dynamic that got me into this was looking at economic shifts that are happening right now. And at the time when I first began this back in 2016, 2017, we hadn't had an economic downturn for a while. Pandemic happened. We are now in a moment in time, and this is recent data from Canada. This is April 2022. Inflation is higher than it has been since 1991. And so we're in the midst of this economic stretch right now. And this combined with, I don't know if any of you have read Ray Dalio's book on changing world order, but one of the things that he graphs that predicts when a country in the United States, for example, is currently in power, that will show us that it is massively in the decline is when it starts to do things like print money and release massive amounts of credit, which is what is happening currently here in the United States. So what will or will not happen moving forward, particularly with the conflicts of Russia invading Ukraine, we don't know yet. But what we do know through all of this is that there's a lot of shift and change going on. And so at this time, when I was doing all of this research, what I noticed was that any one of these three things on their own, the impact of technology and work in our working world, the shift in the workforce population, or economic downturns of multiple kinds, any one of those things on their own is enough to massively change what's happening in the world. However, when we begin to look at the dynamics of convergence, all of them together means disruption can be enormous. Now, this is not all doom and gloom, because I know it can feel scary when I get up here and say, everything in the world is changing. Oh my goodness, buckle your seatbelt. The difference in times like this is that there's actually more opportunity inside of this change than has ever been present for humanity. The difference is simply that it's going to look different than what we're used to.